This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
All right, Real Talkers, buckle up. We've got a lot to cover. We're going to be, we're not going to say all over the map, John, in this episode of the show, because that would make it sound like there's not a plan.
No, it sounds like there's a lot to talk about.
There's a very specific plan, but there's a lot to talk about. David Legg is going to join us. He's the former CEO of Invest Alberta. I want to get his take on the AIMCo board being fired. CEO is going to be replaced, but a lot of people that are watching, especially in finance and pension sectors, are saying that this is about way more than an under-delivering, overpaid board. This is political. The Premier's office and the UCP have talked about investing closer to home, new use of and growth of the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, sitting at about $24 billion right now. I know a lot of you look at, people use Norway as that flawed example, province versus country, et cetera, but people have said Alberta's slush fund, that Heritage Savings Trust Fund, should be closer to $250 billion. And that's where the Premier says that she's going to get it. They say they'll have the plan there by the end of the year. I want to ask David about that. Plus, he predicted a Trump victory, went on the record for it in an op-ed, so I'm going to ask him what gave him that sense. We've invited you to send us emails on why you think Trump won or why Kamala Harris lost. And we've got takes from across the political spectrum. Alex and Brent, you're on deck today with your emails to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Marie wrote in about our interview with Kevin Van Tighem, coal mining on the eastern slopes of the Rockies. Plus, Carmen, a Rotarian, is disappointed in my comments about Rotary and their battle with a 101-year-old widow. That was on yesterday's episode of the show. That would have been the, what's today? I'm not very good with actually understanding where we are in the calendar, but this is the 14th of November. That would have been
a busy guy, folks.
I do know it's Thursday. It's the 14th, so that would have been the 13th of November. Not so much a flamethrower. Maybe it was a little bit, but I had some strong words about Rotary's battle with this woman over her husband's $40 million estate. And Carmen wrote in and said, I'm not telling the full story. He says there's two sides to every story, which is 100% true, and we want to give Carmen the floor. So we got a lot to get to today on the episode, and we're grateful that you're here with us. It's made possible with the presenting sponsorship of Business Career College's new CDAA designation. That's the Certified Digital Asset Advisor. Cryptocurrency, like it or not, is going to change Canadians' investment and private wealth. 3/4 of the new generation of investors say that they're interested in adding digital assets to their financial portfolios. And so that means that financial advisors are going to be seeing an increase in questions about Bitcoin, blockchain, NFTs, decentralized finance. You're going to be asked about wealth preservation strategies to hedge against inflation and currency devaluation. You want to know what you're talking about, so you're going to want to make sure you grab this designation. Business Career College has been in the business of financial training since 1997, so you know their credibility is there. You can learn more at businesscareercollege.com. The promo code Ryan20, all one word, is going to knock 20% off the investment you're making in your career as a financial advisor. That's Ryan20 when you sign up today at businesscareercollege.com. David Legg, in about 1 minute. Before we do that, we talked to veteran journalist Graham Hicks on yesterday's episode of the show and asked him for his take. What are the insiders saying? What are his sources telling him about the AIMCo board? This is the Alberta Investment Management Corporation, responsible for managing about $170 billion in assets. Could be more if Alberta pulls out of the Canada Pension Plan. So we covered all that ground with Graham and asked him what he makes of the story that people are talking about all across the country.
Is this just necessary house cleaning or a Machiavellian coup of some kind where the government has an agenda that is going to change things? The issue here is the government would love, I think, to have money to invest in Alberta directly, but then you're putting all of your eggs in a basket. Imagine if you have a pension in AIMCo. Now, the government's saying those two are not connected, but if you have money from the Heritage Savings Trust Fund going into investments in Alberta, then you're not really divesting your portfolio very well. And this is more a political move. And then you have Stephen Harper, his name popping up. So the fear right now, and the speculation, there's lots of speculation because the government hasn't been really transparent on what's actually going on. This happens, a coup. I called it a coup in my column for a potential coup in my column in Toronto Star because it moved so quickly. So the question is, what are they really up to?
What are they really up to? Well, let's get somebody else's take on it. David Knight Legg is the former CEO of Invest Alberta. He's an advisor to governments, energy, and financial services firms. Grateful to have him back on the show. David, thanks for making time for us this morning. Where do we find you?
Hey, I'm in Washington, D.C., and I forgot to wear the Canadian version of a MAGA hat, which is that black Real Talk with Ryan Jesperson hat.
That's the Canadian version of the MAGA hat. Oh my God!
I didn't travel with it.
We need to update our merch page to maybe reference that. Is that a real background behind you for the folks on the podcast?
It is. Yeah, I'm in DC, and I'm meeting some good friends who are probably going to go through a confirmation process, and it's a wild time here. You've probably seen some of the nominations coming up, but yeah. Ryan, I think you should go for a dark Ryan version where it's sort of black on black Real Talk.
Yeah, we'll take this under advisement.
Noted.
John's already probably scouring the websites for our merch suppliers to see what's available.
I want a dark Ryan.
We'll send you the first one. What do you make of? I was going to talk Alberta. We can talk Alberta in a quick second. So you say you're alluding to the fact that friends of yours will be working in the Trump administration. What do you make of his appointments thus far? It's all anybody was talking about yesterday. Some pretty attention grabbing ones for sure.
Yeah. Look, I think some are obvious and some are pretty non-obvious, and that's why you have a nomination process. It was interesting to see John Thune win he's going to be leading the Senate, and actually there was a lot of support for Rick Scott, who was competing with him for that role from within the MAGA team. So I think you're going to see that the issues. There's a funny connection to what we're talking about with AIMCo and what's going on in DC. There's concern that you don't get too much consolidation of power in one set of hands, or that people are able to sort of take what's in the provincial interest with respect to AIMCo and how we treat pensions, or what's in the national interest with respect to, a very strong mandate, that you have a balance of power still playing out. And that's certainly going to happen with all the nominees.
Yeah, interesting in the New York Times today, the headlines, Gates, Gabbard, Hegseth, Trump's picks are a show of force. Subheader, President-elect Donald J. Trump's cabinet picks show that he prizes loyalty over experience and is fueled by retribution. Katie Rogers, the journalist, references a Fox News ally for defense secretary, former Democrat turned Trump world celebrity to oversee 18 spy agencies, a right-wing provocateur for the nation's top law enforcement job. Is the entire world getting a hint on exactly how Trump intends to govern by the early appointments?
Look, I think, you've got Marco Rubio, you've got Lee Zeldin, you've got, I think 4 or 5 of his nominees are pretty obvious and expected. Hegseth's interesting because he's written a lot about the idea. He's a 20-year veteran, pretty good writer, pretty smart guy. He's written a lot about what he felt was the betrayal of the general staff of fighting people. And so what I want to say about him that I find, and again, I'm just watching this, right? I have no insight into how or why these choices are being made. And I have a personal opinion. I don't think a lot of Matt Gaetz. I respect Tulsi Gabbard. That's going to be a big appointment for her. But Pete Hegseth is like you've seen in Trump's broader movement. He's very much around the little guy, the guy who actually serves in the trenches, and what had happened in a series of misbegotten foreign policy initiatives by the Americans and how those ended, particularly with Afghanistan. So I think he's definitely signaling disruption. His appointment of Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy into government efficiency and a restructuring of government, to me, is the most interesting and the most direct, appointments to date. I'm interested that he hasn't yet appointed RFK into HHS, and that's the one that I thought he would lead with.
What do you think about that? Like, I understand. I'll reference your column in the Western Standard that was published before the election. Obviously, you said this is why Trump will win tomorrow. So you went on the record and you proved yourself to be right. And I follow you on Twitter at Knight Legg, and I know that you believe that at least part of the reason that Trump won was his kind of unify strategy that brought RFK and his supporters into the fold. Do you think it's the right move to put him as essentially the health czar? Look,
I think he has to. It's interesting the way that that these different personalities play with different cohorts. One of the reasons the unity ticket worked is if you did any sort of micro polling, you realize that it was RFK that delivered independents, particularly women who are concerned about chronic obesity, childhood disease, and rising rates of childhood diseases across the board. And he's been talking about this stuff for a decade. Now, a lot of people, think that he's a conspiracy theorist, but, again, this kind of leads to the second part of the argument I made at the time, which is these guys were constantly in long form podcasts like the one we're on right now, being held to account for what they think and why they thought it, for up to 2-3 hours. And so they got a series of messages out that form as close to a mandate, particularly if you sort of see the shift in what was happening after he declared that unity ticket. That means that he needs to appoint RFK Jr. That was part of the point. I think the question with a lot of these appointments, first of all, these appointments head these agencies, but no one person can completely shift the Department of Defense or the national intelligence community or something as broad, dealing with as big a mandate as HHS is. So I think that RFK will get certainly appointed, and I think the question is going to be, where does he take the mandate, and what do they do that's practical, and what do they do that actually represents the broadest part of the consensus they were elected on?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because we see this in leadership contests probably more than general elections, but general elections as well, where there's obviously big promises, there's lots of sound bites, there's lots of strategic messaging and campaigning, and then you see when a leader wins and assumes office, they kind of folks expect that kind of pendulum swing back to middle, and they return to the median or return to the norm and kind of govern at least down the middle. But I think Trump is. He's a bit of a wild card. He's certainly a unicorn. Like there's really nobody else. There's certainly been no other U.S. president like Donald Trump. Probably no other world leader that would come close to his prominence, his conviction, his ego, his support right now, and probably the potential with the Senate and the House, the Supreme Court. Would you agree that this is going to be unlike these next 4 years anything that Americans and probably people on planet Earth have ever seen?
Look, I think it's 2 years where the state, you and I have talked in the past about the state of our economy, which is what concerns me as a Canadian. They are in terrible shape down here with respect to just the amount of money that they spend on interest, like we do. If you take today in Canada, if you burn $55 billion, we're approaching lighting on fire 15% of all the taxes we pay just to give foreign banks their interest payments. This is crazy. It results in a decline of public services across the board. Like us, they still have their federal bureaucracy thinking that it's still COVID, even though that's been over for 3 years and working from home. And Americans broadly just had it with that, and I think they know that this current situation is untenable. Now the question becomes, you can't make the cure worse than the disease. So you've got to have a lot of a broad-based coalition of people that really want to work in a manner that will actually produce better outcomes. That's the point. I'm obviously less concerned than, my good friend Andrew Coyne is really concerned that this is a form of soft fascism or something that's moving into play with some of these appointments. I don't believe that's the case, and I don't believe the American structure allows for that to be the case. I think that that's sour grapes. But I do think that there has to be really thoughtful, and deep staffing against some of these roles under someone like Hegseth, and that's what I hope will happen over the next couple of months. There's terrific people that have served across a bunch of administrations that put their country first above a particular party, and they're expert at what they do, and they're deep on it. They're not replaceable easily, and I think that's going to be what we see happen after he appoints people that represent the cohorts that actually elected him and the mandate that he feels that he's got. So I'm an optimist. Someone like Andrew should probably put on the on Real Talk at some point. Deep pessimist. I think he's wrong. But Canada, we've got our own issues right now. I wrote a tweet just a couple of days ago. It's got 70,000 views, and it's talking about what this bizarre idea that we had to create a special council of liberal cabinet ministers to deal with the crisis of there being a Republican administration. I find this deeply embarrassing. The other countries aren't creating a special council and putting their whole cabinet in it to do these declarative 2-day updates on what they talked about. What they have to talk about is that we're a disaster on trade. We have the worst performing economic policy in the advanced economies, the worst track on productivity. We're burning more than $58 billion a year on interest instead of putting it into public services. We've lost control of, we're the biggest threat right now to the Liberal cabinet ministers is that Trump's plan to drop the tax on investment in capital in order to generate economic productivity from the private sector and the investment of risk capital. We've gone the complete opposite direction, having the third highest tax on capital in all of the OECD. So I think there's going to be enormous pressure on Canada from the policy side. I think there's going to be enormous pressure on trade, and there's going to be enormous pressure on security. The days of not paying our NATO dues and being a deadbeat, the only deadbeat in all the NATO coalition that breaks both basic payment rules. Everyone else breaks one. 5 countries don't break any. And we're the only ones breaking both. And we were one of the founding nations of NATO. And we've got, so much potential with AUKUS coming up, NORAD, all the stuff that we can do with critical mineral supply chains, AI. I mean, there's hundreds of crossover investments we could be making to things that benefit the real economy and the military that would count. And we're simply not making those investments. And meanwhile, we're burning $54 billion at peak EV in projects that are competing with Tesla and the Chinese supply chain, which produces these things 60% lower than the cost that it would take us to do it. It's just, it's hard to watch, but it's kind of like watching a group therapy AA meeting called the U.S.-Canada Relations Liberal Party Committee come out and announce they've discovered something new that we're going to have to deal with. And, they're right, we're going to have to deal with it. But I hope that part of the way we deal with it is adopting best practice policy.
Yeah, we were talking about this on the show the other day. I think that the least controversial, demand from Donald Trump to Canada is to meet Canada's obligations to NATO. Like if it's a commitment, it's an obligation. You got to meet it. Like to me, that's not. There's almost not even like room for debate on that one. So that to me is one where that should have been met years ago. That's something that Canada should prioritize. That's something that Canada should be a leader on, and it clearly hasn't. I want to put some audio in front of you. This is Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland in the House just the other day talking about dealing with Donald Trump in past.
I've stood up to Trump, and I have stood up to Putin. Juvenile playground insults from the wannabe MAGA maple syrup conservatives do not frighten me at all.
Okay, so there you go. You can obviously hear the official opposition MPs heckling her in the background. Do you believe that a conservative-led government, a Pierre Poilievre government, would do any better with Trump? You're describing our trade right now as a disaster.
Yeah, look, I think there's two. I think we have to distinguish two things, and I've written about this particularly with Minister Freeland when she came down to do the initial negotiations for USMCA, and everybody down here refers to this. She put a series of completely untenable, bizarre demands on the table. Those weren't met. And then she went on to openly trash talk the Trump presidency in 3 different occasions that were very prominent. And the last straw was her going on, talking back to the tyrant, talking about Putin, Xi, and Trump. And after that, the U.S. Trade Representative froze Canada out of negotiations completely. This is all on the record. This is not some sort of partisan view. Canada was out. And the U.S. went on and they did a bilateral agreement with Mexico, and they called it the United States-Mexico Free Trade Agreement. It was probably one of the worst crises in the trading relationship between Canada and the U.S. ever. Lighthizer had Larry Kudlow, come out and say Canada should come back to the table. Chrystia Freeland had to cut the trip in Europe short, fly back in. And Canada had to negotiate. Thankfully, we have some terrific people here that represent Canada and Canada's interests. They're not partisans. They wouldn't see themselves conservative or liberal. They see themselves as working in the best interest of Canadians on these issues, which are longstanding issues. And they were able to rescue big chunks of that deal, and 2 out of the several demands that Freeland had wanted were represented in the final agreement. But the damage that was done with that, the damage that's done by her right in a week before an election is decided, where many of us said it's certainly going to be Trump. They might even sweep. She's using this shorthand that plays to her base and maybe plays to the people sitting behind her. But, her government's supported by 1 in 5 Canadians now, 20% of the country. She plays these partisan talking points. She did the same thing in their own election in St. Paul's and lost it by 600 votes. She's a deep partisan, which is fine. That's politics. But when her job is to represent Canada, when she wears the uniform of our deputy prime minister or our finance minister or the minister running foreign affairs or trade, whatever the topic is, you have to take off your partisan jersey for a second and do the job. And she did a terrible job of that. And they don't like her at all. They see her, her use of FinTrack terror legislation, which the Americans have tried desperately to get Canada to use against actual terrorist laundering in Toronto, to the point they've announced who the 2 Iranians doing the laundering, what the name of their company was, right? Back when we weren't naming the IRGC as a designated terrorist group. They're so furious down here with that laxity using FinTrack. They saw the same person that can hardly be bothered to use it against known terrorists use it against truckers and their supporters in the Freedom Convoy to freeze bank accounts and destroy their businesses. Now, so Trump actually came out and said, this is soft liberal fascism, right? That's what he called it when he was at CPAC. This is not a crowd that likes Chrystia Freeland. They don't like the fact she did the payoff to Omar Khadr without requiring the payment to Sergeant Spears' widow in Utah. They don't like the approach on the trade thing. They don't like the fact that they're glib about knowing that it's funny in Canada to be down on Trump, but he's the president of the United States and we have to do deals with him. There's a decorum and a style of diplomacy that accepts the fact that you could have ideological differences between 2 very different parties in 2 different countries, but still represent the best interests of your country when you're given the job and to do that. And so I think the big issue for Minister Freeland and for this committee, which keeps announcing that they're going to defend our national interests, they're worried about Canadians' anxiety. Tell you what Canadians are anxious about. Canadians are anxious about having the worst living standards in 40 years because of a complete decline in productivity, a complete decline in the value of the currency, a decline in net wages, relative spending power, 28% destruction of your retiree parents' savings in their bank account in terms of what that account could buy in 2015 and what it can buy today. And that's the stuff that the Canadians are anxious about. They could care less about, or they're not care less, but they're less worried about the administration of another country and what those policies mean, and more worried about what we can do about it as Canadians. And they don't need that to be hugely partisan. So do I think the Conservatives will do it differently? I think the Conservatives have to do it in a way that's more disciplined so the outcomes are better.
A buddy of mine from the CBC works there. He was on his way to work just the other day, just outside our studio. We're right across the street from Roger's place. And he told me when he was on his way to work yesterday, there was a woman just standing at the Gretzky statue, just screaming at it. And I said, I think I might know why. It's one of the biggest stories in Canada right now. The great one, mingling with his family at a Trump event on election night. I saw you tweet that you love it. How come?
I love him. I love that guy.
Everybody loves that guy.
I love that guy. He put Canada on the map. Let me say it this way. He went to one of our icons. He's not just a hockey player. He's a cultural icon. He's one of the very few people that Americans who don't know very much about Canada look at and go, that guy was the very best in the world. He taught us all the game when he came down to play. Like, he is the best emissary of the game of Canada. If he did this, if Kamala Harris won, I would still love him for it. He can't do anything wrong. He shows up and he puts us in place. Let me tell you this. Here's what I think. Let's thread these together. Chrystia Freeland should put in a call to the Great One and say, look, you got a better relationship with these guys than I do. Here's 5 things we'd really like them to think about. Yeah. And put it into the community, because everybody knows everybody there and here knows he is not political. He's not trying to fly a flag for a political outcome. That guy, everywhere he goes, he brings something great, lovable, good that reflects Canadian excellence, professionalism, and greatness, dominance in a sport that's, I think, the toughest sport in the world. And so the fact that he goes and he represents us in a good way to the guy that just won the presidency of the United States and the Senate and the House, thank God we had him there. I wish we had 5 other guys there. And the same thing if it was a Democrat that won and we have a few people that they love and think are great Canadians and they show up, right? I'd love that. And so I think, no, leave him out of the political stuff. He doesn't deserve to be tagged as a conservative or an NDP or a liberal. He's the man. And so, no, that one was too far. That like trying to throw stones through his front window because he's doing something, hanging with people he likes, and they happen to be political. That's crazy.
Yeah, I wonder if Kirsten Hillman could be replaced as Canada's ambassador to the United States by 99. I don't know. That'd be a move I think most Canadians could get behind.
I see a vision of Wayne Gretzky wearing a dark Ryan cap.
You and the Caps. You and the Caps.
Announcing himself as you got to run the cap. The cap strategy is smarter than people think.
Oh, of course. I mean, the brand is extremely strong. The MAGA brand is incredibly strong, and it draws something out of people. Like, you know, I mean, we were. What was going on at Rogers Place right before the U.S. election? Was it PBR? I think it was it the Bull Riders? Or there was something else going on. And so there's a bunch of like visitors from out of town, that sort of a thing. And I was at West Edmonton Mall. It's like honestly my least favorite place to be. It's just so many people. There's so much going on. But you see these. You see these red ball caps, and they jump out like they stick out like crazy, and it draws something out of people, good and bad, right? Like, you know, or
nothing these guys do is by accident.
No,
by the way. They took the idea of the lawn sign and they allowed people to put it on their heads.
Yeah.
And they shorthanded it in a way that was about the idea of America, not a political party or a, notice they don't say Trump, they say MAGA, right? It's about America, not the guy. He did the same thing. You know, the wild thing about, I wrote this thing about the McDonald's incident. A bunch of mine were like, oh, that's funny. I said, that's not funny. 1 in 8 Americans, 1 in 8 has worked at a McDonald's, the largest single employer in the United States, either public or private. When I looked that up, I couldn't believe it. I had to like research twice. He didn't just troll Kamala Harris for saying she'd worked at a McDonald's. He picked up on it, made it into an iconic sort of moment to play across the way people think. The secret to the way this guy thinks is that he knows as well as anybody. He used to be a Democrat. He flirted. Do you remember back in the day he actually ran for president about like 20 years ago?
No.
Under a Reform Party ticket? Yeah, look that up. People forget that. He was not a Republican, right? He wasn't a Democrat because he knew he wouldn't get in. He wasn't a Republican. But his experience flirting with doing a third-party ticket, he was talking back with Jesse Ventura, who he knew from the wrestling days, and Ventura had won as an independent and swept it, and Trump thought, well, maybe that's my opportunity. Anyway, he learned a ton during that process. And what he learned about independence is what I learned in my stint in government, which is most Albertans, most Americans don't actually carry a colored card in their wallet saying I'm a diehard liberal or NDP or conservative. Most of them are like, that's for the political nerds in high school. Just, you know, 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10 of them. But we're going to vote our interest. In America, this is the first election where the cohort of independents was actually larger than the cohort of either Democrats or Republicans. First time in history. And what he gets is the fact that you might have worked at McDonald's 15 years ago and remember it fondly as your first job means you love the fact that guy put on an apron and said McDonald's was awesome. And that appeals to this unbelievable number of 1 in 8 Americans, you know, voting age Americans. So that you like, whether it's Caps, it's the McDonald's thing, 100 other small things, the podcast they appeared on, this stuff is incredibly tactical. It's very purposeful and it works.
This is just us scratching our own back for a second, but you have been I mean you've been pumping podcasts, and you talked about how you thought that it was brilliant for Trump to focus on podcasts, Joe Rogan in particular. You thought it was a big mistake. I'm hearing different stories on why Kamala Harris didn't do Rogan, but you said you thought it was a mistake that she didn't. You're sort of ranking podcasts ahead of mainstream media when it comes to connecting with the general public. Music to my ears, we strongly believe the same thing. But when did you, I don't say change your mind, but when did you reach that conclusion and why?
Well, the first time I ever appeared on a podcast was Real Time with Ryan Jesperson.
Real Talk, yeah, you were.
But let's, if you don't mind, me talking a little bit about the background of that?
Sure.
So there was some contentious stuff going on in Alberta at the time, and you and I had a bourbon with our great friend Alex, and you said, "What's wrong with you guys? Why won't you appear on a podcast and defend what you think? If you really believe in it, tell Albertans why you believe in it. If you can't tell them, if you can't handle one of my hard questions," you didn't say go F yourself, but you're sort of like, then you're not really doing your job as well. And I took that to heart. And as you know, I said, okay, I'll go, I'll come on. And you asked me hard questions.
David, let me interject for a second to remind people, like, Jason Kenney would not do an interview with me for years, and you were his top advisor. And when you agreed to an interview with me, it was a huge deal.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll tell you, and I talked to you about this on the side, but I said there's a lot of people that are furious because I didn't ask permission.
Yep.
Right. And there's a reason I didn't ask permission, because I walked away from that, I think, more clearly after a couple bourbons with our friends there at the, well, they've moved bars now, but the new one's good. But
Mercer Tavern,
it stuck with me. What you said stuck with me, was absolutely true, and I had strong convictions true. And I called you and I said, I'll do it. And you sort of, I think you were very kind. You're like, is there anything you specifically need to address it? No, just hit me with it, and you did. You played completely fair. You asked hard questions. I had to respond to things that I wasn't prepared for. There was no softballs. But here's the thing. I think that anybody listening to Real Talk knows who you are, trusts who you are, and they know that you're going to ask the question that they would like to have asked. And if you don't think that you've thought about it, they can send one to you and say, hey, ask this square that works for the right-wing Vikings why he did this with my tax money, right? And then people feel like, you know what? I may not like the guy, but I appreciate the fact he's willing to show up. He's willing to, drop the gloves, go into the corner, grind a little bit. And maybe I even accept the fact that I didn't have the whole understanding of why he did what he did. Even if I may not agree with the outcome, I can at least understand why somebody who can influence the way my money's being spent or the policies that represent me as an Albertan are occurring. And that empowers me. And it also informs me. So the next time these people run for office, I know where I stand and I know why I stand there. And that's actually democracy. And I think what's happened with the mainstream media is to be fair to them, they're so compressed by an editorial structure that has to meet advertising requirements and timelines that fit in the specific sort of programmatic style, that it doesn't have, the sort of framing around how things have to happen. I mean, they're hugely risk averse and everything gets choreographed. But frankly, when it comes to things that matter as much as our national security or how we spend taxpayer money on a pipeline or what we're doing with people's pension funds, right? Come on. I mean, my dad cares deeply about what we're doing with our pension fund in Alberta. That matters to him and his friends more than anything else that we talk about. And because of that, you got to be accountable. You got to put yourself out there and you've got to figure out what your good answers are. And frankly, last point, Ryan, when you asked me a couple of questions, it made me walk away as a nerd and go and figure out, hey, I said this, I really want to be sure I'm nailing this down the right way, how we structured that deal or what we thought. And so it creates, I think podcasts are the future. The public support and trust in mainstream media has dropped through the floor. I mean, the numbers are, you ask people if they trust the news now, and I think it's dropped to something like 17%. There's more people that believe, there's people that believe in UFOs than people that believe that they've been on one, right? You start going through the demographics, you're like, the trust in mainstream media is reaching a point where people are just like, I think it's just too performative and theatrical and choreographed. I don't even trust it. Yeah. And so, but you can ask anything and people know it. And that's why they trust you. And they know that you can, double click and say, we got to get that guy on. I don't think he told us the whole story or whatever. And so I think what the Harris campaign really missed was, especially for somebody that came in so new, she had three things running against her that I thought her campaign was going to really address. First is, what's the difference between you and President Biden? Because the wrong direction arrow is almost at 70%, right? And she should have been able to nail that. And there was a graceful way to nail that without throwing President Biden under the bus. I think the second thing that she had to do is say, you're an unknown quantity. You were known as sort of the most liberal senator, but you seem to have measured yourself as VP. You're the one that was supposed to have been a border czar, but apparently that's not totally correct. So just explain yourself to us, because you're kind of an unknown quantity. And a podcast gives people a chance to see the personality of the person beyond simply what they're scripted to say. And by passing it over, only go on the one podcast that she went on, she missed a chance to kind of let Americans see who she was up close. And it's kind of like the devil in the case of Trump. And the reason I think Trump's unity ticket strategy worked so well is because he polled so poorly with women that when he brought in RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, some of these others, he softened his image, but he also expanded the traditional Republican policy structure into categories of things that independents that are far more motivated by just those health and wellness issues were able to vote for and hold their nose on the fact that it was part of the Trump ticket, because they're voting for people that they knew they personally wanted to see able to influence policies in that way. That all happened through the podcast medium. Nothing else worked. You couldn't have described RFK's view on things with short form paid media TV ads in swing states.
Peaches in our live chat on YouTube says Joe Rogan's interview with Trump won him the White House. I disagree. I think getting shot in the ear and standing up and raising his fist and chanting fight, I think that's what won him the White House, to be honest with you. You agree, Johnny? I think, remember, you and I said that the morning we were texting each other when it happened.
And I see David's point, but what I think now, after you saw Rogan kind of come out for Trump after, is I don't think it would have played well with Kamala. I don't think he would have treated her kind of the same way as Trump. But that's just my opinion.
But I think he would have given her a fair shake.
Oh, for sure he would have. But I feel like she would have been a little more cornered. Like, him and Trump were just riffing. They were talking about aliens and everything, right?
For sure.
I think it would have been a much different interview.
In the live chat as well on YouTube, Erica says McDonald's, the garbage truck, Joe Rogan's podcast, those things were all mocked, but they all got results. That from Erica in our live chat. If you're just tuning in on the Mixlr live streaming audio app, we're talking to David Legg, former CEO of Invest Alberta. I know you got to go, but I can't let you go without talking about Alberta. The belief is that Danielle Smith's UCP wants to see AIMCo invest more in Alberta. Didn't love the international investment. They're kind of spinning this, firing the board, the CEO, as underperforming and overpaid. I think most people believe there's more to it than that. What do you make of a pretty remarkable situation? And what do you think? I mean, former CEO of Invest Alberta, where do you think that AIMCo and, in particular, the Heritage Savings Trust Fund should be deployed? What do you think is the appropriate use? What do you think is best for Albertans?
Look, I think I'm close to some of those dynamics, but I think that there's sort of three different things with the response. It was Graham that spoke about this earlier, right?
Yeah.
So to address what he said, I could see why there's this sense of concern or people are connecting dots, because there's this issue of Alberta pension plan and how much Albertans pay into the national pension plan and don't take out of it. And if you compound that, it's half of CPPIB assets. There's discussion of that and what that means and how you secure that. By the way, that doesn't mean you take that money out and you put it into an Alberta run plan. It just means those dollars are marked as Alberta dollars and you allocate those to a manager, which can include CPPIB in perpetuity, but you just take more control over performance allocation. That's one issue, APP, CPP discussion. Second issue is the overall performance of any public agency, board, or executive team. And if you feel that you have to reach past the board to fire an executive, then you have to let the board go. You can't fire an executive team without removing the board. So there's sort of a cascade on the governance side that if you've made the choice that this is untenable, you have to go. In terms of personal view, I think that what is happening is actually a pattern, and I respect it in the sense that they fired the HS board to completely reset that on a set of principles they think will be more help us achieve much better health outcomes within a budget structure. They've fired the Banff Center Arts Board because of dysfunction in that board. So what they've shown the public is there has to be accountability. You can't just take it like the old days in Alberta, where once you've got that, people can sort of treat it like a sinecure. And I think that's healthy politically. I think the messaging, though, needs to be very clear that the job of a pension fund is always and only to secure the maximum risk-adjusted return for pensioners, period. And that should never have a political component to it, because politicians live for the next election and fiduciary pension fund managers live for the retirement of the people that are paying into it, which might be 30, 40 years from now. And you can't get into small ball politics. Imagine, Ryan, back when we first talked about some of these issues, 2019, 2020, I was working on a structure around what we're going to do with pensions, what we're going to do with capital markets, how we're going to respond to ESG. You can't have political pressure on someone like me able to access the equivalent of a sovereign wealth fund and start to put it into things that we wanted to see funded. At the end of the day, if we wanted to see infrastructure jobs and 15,000 hard hats get to work in Alberta by initiating KXL and getting the approval of all the Democrat and Republican governors and senators along the way, we had to do that. And then we paid the price for that. You don't want me to be able to go to a heritage fund or to an AIMCo and say, you should do this because I'm a politically sensitive guy. And if I don't like it, I'll fire people and replace people on the board that will do my bidding. Terrible for pensioners, terrible for the stability of the province and of its reputation financially, if that ever happened. And it won't ever happen. That won't happen. Stephen Harper, if he ends up being the chair, and this board will be bulletproof on that issue. No one is going to touch the fiduciary mandate of a pension fund and allow that to become political. Completely implausible. The issues that were brought up were poor performance, a series of bad decisions that had really big fee implications. And that just takes money away from our pensioners. And at a certain point, you say, we want to reset, and that's the job of the government to do it. But the job of the government is not to take a reset and turn it into a politicized mandate. Now, what Singapore does is they have two different funds. One's called Temasek, one's called GIC. One is allowed to invest inside the country, Temasek, and the other one's not allowed to touch anything inside the country, the entire country. GIC can't touch anything. And so they have their offices externally, and they've developed a reputation as a very large sovereign wealth fund of investing very successfully and not having any potential for there to be anything political because they're not even allowed to touch anything inside the country. So there are ways to structure this mandate to create even firmer guardrails than the ones we have in place at AIMCo, and those are worth debating. I think for heritage, what you'll see is something that is a stronger fund that we actually make the mandate tougher and less political. So heritage, the problem it had was politicians called it a rainy day fund.
Yeah.
And for a politician, it could be a July 4th weekend with no clouds in the sky. I'm like, I feel like it's going to rain and we need to pay for these hot dogs in a slightly more upgraded place to eat them, right? And so a politician will always see rain on the horizon. If you give them a rainy day fund, they'll find a reason to spend it. And so what we need with heritage, if we want to avoid, Ryan, you probably remember when we were younger, the heritage fund was the thing that paid high school kids like a $600 or $800 or $1,500 scholarship. You got a bunch of A's.
The Rutherford scholarships. Yeah. The Rutherford
it helped you pay your
scholarships.
tuition bill if you got A's in 5 subjects or more, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was a brilliant use of the heritage fund. Now, that is not what a pension fund does. That's what a sovereign wealth fund does. And you can employ it for political purposes, which get debated hotly by the public at large. But back then, there was a sense of fiduciary responsibility to the next generation. And so the way they expressed that was saying, we can pay for some things with this fund, but those things will be things that we all agree across partisan lines are the things that should be paid for, because we don't want the crazy guys to take over the asylum and start, pumping the rock music and partying because they've got access to $24 billion. So I think one of the best things that can come out of this conversation is, what do we want Heritage Fund to look like? How do we get it to be a $200 billion fund where the income that it kicks off is enough to pay for the top performing high schoolers, no matter their background, to go to the best schools in Alberta, and we have a scholarship for them to go to some of the best research universities for grad school anywhere in the world on an Alberta Heritage Scholarship, so that our kids, our next generation that are brilliant and smart, don't get a benefit from this because they're a political persuasion. They get a benefit because they're great at what they do, and we want Albertans to be successful around the planet, and they can thank their lucky stars. Their parents were smart enough to put them in school in Alberta, and there's a benefit to it. I think those are the kinds of things that we can do with something like the Heritage Fund if we're careful about it and treat it as an intergenerational trust fund. And then that's the kind of stuff that I love the idea of, because then the Heritage Fund is a repository for excess royalty payments where we keep a disciplined, lean operation of government, where those royalty payments are put to work for all Albertans in ways that we broadly agree are the right ways to do it without breaking the bank. Now, last point about investment into Alberta. I was just at our Invest Alberta board offsite. We've closed $24.5 billion in deals now, 30,000 jobs. We've got tons of stuff coming in. We've got some great new things emerging on AI and these huge data farms. I think Alberta is on the upswing. Earlier this year, we were 90% of all the private sector hiring in the entire country as a province, partly because we're doing things that are closer to what happened internationally with corporate income taxes they're not there yet, but getting towards something that's internationally competitive. So when a company like Dow or Linde or Air Products, so I did all the negotiations with, are looking at 5 different places on the planet to put the greenest ethylene cracker, they choose to put it into Alberta because we've sort of created an environment for private capital to come in and say, we'll put collectively, between those 3 companies, it's $20 billion investment, right, into Alberta. That's money the government doesn't have to put into that project. That's coming from private, smartest capital in the world. And it's building something that will create assets that will last for 40, 50 years and hire thousands and thousands of people. And so I think that there's an opportunity for Alberta to continue to look at itself and say, how do we create the next Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, the next Invest Alberta Corporation, the best approach to taxes, the best approach to the way that we allow skills trades and develop our universities to map to the areas where there's opportunity. That's the thing that creates the economic momentum, that creates the wealth and jobs. You never want to touch a pension fund and say, why don't you guys make it easier for us and try and just put money into things we like? If the things are so good, go ahead and convince the biggest, best, deepest pocketed firms and funds in the world to put that money here. And if they say no, find out why and start to understand what it's going to take to make us a much more vibrant, attractive place to make those investments so our taxpayers don't have to.
David Knight Legg, former CEO of Invest Alberta. I've always appreciated your availability and your time coming to us live from Washington, D.C. Thanks for doing the show.
Thanks again, Ryan. See you soon.
All right, man. We'll see you soon.
I want my cap.
Pumping the rock.
We're gonna have to go with that. I like that.
Pumping the rock. Music.
Yeah, we could, but he's 100% correct about the power of the brand.
Sure, yeah.
And there's no, I was trying to think, like, as he was developing that thought around the red hat and it's kind of that MAGA brand. I was trying to think of like what would be the equivalent on the Democrat side, and I think the one I think of, and everybody, if you're even listening on the podcast, you will see it in your brain as soon as I say it. But that Obama Hope poster.
Oh, huge.
Right?
Huge.
Like that was like, that is an iconic sort of a bit of political
it's embedded
messaging
in your brain, in your memory.
Yeah, and I think that people, folks that would attend political conventions, you can see these sometimes in thrift shops and things like that, but the buttons, like lapel pins and buttons used to be a really big deal.
Huge.
And you would see like with, you can get the old school ones of like what were the Richard Nixon ones? Like there's one that says like can't beat our dick or something like that for Dick Nixon. And like there's all these kind of different ones through the years that have been, I don't know if that one's iconic, but certainly the Obama Hope poster is the MAGA hat. And like I was saying, walking around, the mall, and you see that red hat, and if you're a Trump supporter, that's one that you just are like, yeah, like you see that solidarity. And if you can't stand Donald Trump, that red hat is like a trigger for people. Like it's
marketing is huge. What was that bumper sticker here? I wasn't here, but it was huge. Everyone talks about it here in Alberta. Some bumper sticker about what was it about? Was it Ralph Klein?
Oh, during the Klein years?
Yeah,
I'm not sure. I'm sure
someone
in our chat. It'll be 2 points up for grabs.
Something about tax or something, but that's all I heard about
Ottawa,
when it came here as well.
Let me guess. The middle finger.
But like those marketing tactics, and I agree with David, like Trump almost like didn't have to even talk about, although, obviously his policies he was going to implement were huge talking points. But I think he could have got elected without it as well. Like the going to McDonald's thing, I agree. That's a huge, that was a huge W. Going on the Joe Rogan podcast, that was a huge W. Just making that base bigger, and maybe, as someone said in the chat here today, getting those light writers, those light leaners to come over and get them out to vote for sure. That was great. Let me just throw this up as well. He was talking about Trump's political donation history. He did donate a lot to Democrats. But the amount was kind of low. And he did kind of play both sides of the field. Here's just a graph. I know bar graphs. I hate bar graphs. They're the dumbest graphs. But you can see all the way back to 89. He supported Kerry. He supported Al Gore, the Clintons, all of them. But kind of, played both sides of the field. But you can see last 14 years from 2010 on, he just boosted his support for the Republicans.
And he probably had eyes on the Oval Office, and maybe he saw that as his ticket. It's political donations are interesting as well, especially when they're made public. Because folks obviously read a lot into it.
He didn't hide it. He was like hanging out with the Clintons back in the day. There's pictures of them together. So it's a weird universe.
I think it was it was him, Bill Clinton, and Jeffrey Epstein.
I think that's
who it was.
And a bunch of cheerleaders.
Yeah, and Diddy. But who is it in our chat? I saw somebody asking about the Obama Hope poster. Somebody said, well, wasn't it, I want to give you credit. It was Justin. What's up, Justin? Says, wasn't the Obama Hope poster, it wasn't even made up by the campaign. It was just some random dude that mocked it up and shared it online. I'm referencing here the Art Institute of Chicago. Let's all learn together. So here's that Obama Hope poster. I know if you're listening on the podcast, you can picture it. You know exactly what we're talking about.
Of course, people copy this.
So, absolutely. It was designed by a street artist, graphic designer, and activist Shepard Fairey, who created the portrait of then Senator Obama in 2008 as a form of grassroots activism to support the campaign. He based the work on an AP photo by Manny Garcia and transformed it with his signature high contrast stencil technique. Emblazoned with the word hope. It was quickly adopted as an official image, so it sounds like Justin's right, of the 2008 presidential campaign. New Yorker art critic Peter Sheshadal called the poster the most efficacious American political illustration since Uncle Sam Wants You.
I mean, iconic. I think that and MAGA are the two biggest ones. Thanks to Maximum Bun. Tax this, Brian. That was remember that, Brian?
Yeah, and then the middle finger. Tax this, Brian.
In our chat. Thanks, Maximum Bun.
Well, that's 2 points for them. 2 points for Maximum. Let us know what you think about the interview. Talk at RyanJesperson.com. I saw that some of you were I think in the chat, criticizing what David's bringing to the. No, I just want to say something. People are like, why do you have this guy on? Are you, first of all, are you kidding me? The former CEO of Invest Alberta, to talk about investing in Alberta. Yeah. But also, it's good, guys, to sometimes hear from somebody that believes things differently than you. I think that's a good thing, and we're not going to waver from that. I want to get to. I get ripped a new one here on this show from Carmen, and I want to get to Carmen's take on my comments on Rotary yesterday. I'm not sure that I would take anything back, but I want to give Carmen the floor. Plus, Alex and Brent have their own thoughts on the U.S. election result. Listen, this is not something that we're sticking on. Once Real Talkers stop emailing us about it, maybe we'll stop talking about it, but you keep filling our inbox to talk at RyanJesperson.com, which is fantastic. A lot of them are great candidates for the flamethrower presented by the DQs of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. That's coming up on our Friday episode of the show. That'll be the next one, so keep those emails coming. These conversations happen with the support of amazing partners like our friends at California Closets, who are the absolute best in the business at custom closets and storage solutions for the entire home. I was telling you the story the other day. Our beautiful little 2-year-old, Noah Bear, he walks up to our glass cabinet in our family room. It's where the entertainment center is. And there are knee-level cabinets with glass doors in them. And he opened one, and then he went to slam it. And for a quick second, I went, oh, my gosh. And then I realized the California Closets cabinet doors closed.
Today, Junior.
Not today, Junior. No shattered glass, because these are the best designed and highest quality cabinets you can get. And they're guaranteed for life. Your California Closets journey starts with a free design consultation, and we endorse them proudly as customers of California Closets. You can book that consultation online today at californiaclosets.ca. We're so proud to be partnering with UCAN Youth Services. We want to be shining a huge spotlight on the work that they are doing, helping young people out of harm's way and onto a path of economic independence. You can check out their Relentless podcast and their docu-series. They do such a good job telling their story. To learn more about how they're empowering 18 to 25-year-olds to get the critical career training they need, and then to see some doors open in front of them. You can donate to UCAN Youth Services if you feel led, or if you're an employer and you have some entry-level positions available that you think might be a great fit, whether it's their Verto project, their Road to Work program that opens the door for young people to enter construction, road building, and traffic safety industries, just a couple of many different examples. You can learn more at ucan.ca. And our friends at Kubi Renewable Energy want to remind you that they're always hiring. They're always hiring, even through the winter months. If you are an unemployed or underemployed electrician, installer, salesperson, HR, office manager, Kubi is growing faster than any other solar company in Canada. Proudly based out of Edmonton, Calgary. They've got a beautiful office in Lethbridge. And of course, they're serving BC out of their Kamloops location. If you're looking for a change of pace and you'd love to be part of the green energy movement in Canada, check out the careers link today at kubienergy.ca. So we get these emails on the election results, and I think that these are some really great takes. I wanted to get to Alex's. Says, I've really enjoyed listening to your coverage breaking down the American election. Real talk, I've been thinking a lot about it over the past week or so, and I wanted to share my thoughts about where I think the Harris campaign went wrong, says Alex. Alex was reading Michael Hirsch in Foreign Policy magazine, quote, in an unfortunate echo of Hillary Clinton's loss in 2016, Harris spent far too much time trying to argue that Trump was unfit for the presidency and too little time delivering a coherent message about why she would be better. I agree, and I think that we've even seen that in Canadian politics. Alex says, closer to home, I think that's what the Alberta NDP were guilty of in the last two provincial elections. Alex, I agree. Progressive parties seem to fall into this trap, and it's not just about what people are looking for, right? It may solidify some voters that are already leaning toward them, but winning is also about convincing voters leaning otherwise to change their minds and giving people who otherwise wouldn't vote at all a reason to vote for you. Nailed it. I think this is much more achievable, says Alex, when you give them a message of hope focused on yourself. Trump's actually good at this, despite his divisiveness and the way he dehumanizes his opponents, because he brings it back to himself. He taps into people's frustrations and gives them a reason to hope that he can be the one to make things better. Alex says, when I think of Obama's campaigns in 2008, 2012, I think of his positive messaging of yes, we can and hope. And I don't recall him being overly focused on his opponents. Of course, it helped that his opponents were John McCain, Mitt Romney, decent people, qualified candidates. I don't think Trump's either of those things. But against Trump, it seems like the Democrats can't help but get overly distracted by the opponent. It's a trap. And I almost wonder, it's a trap. And I almost wonder if Trump deliberately keeps pushing the limits of his rhetoric because he knows that Democrats will fall into that trap. The idea of taking the bait, right? Alex says, I was initially predicting a Harris victory, but I started changing my mind when it seemed like her rhetoric was shifting in that direction. And I'm disappointed, but not surprised by the outcome. I think Alex nails it on you got to focus on the prize. You got to provide a positive vision, hope for the future.
Yeah.
This from Brent, who says, I'm a regular listener of the show. I want to give you a prescriptive of the U.S. election from a guy that spends 2 weeks of every month in the U.S. Interesting. He says, I work in the energy industry since 2012. I've been traveling throughout mostly Pennsylvania. He says, I'm writing you right now, Jespo, from Pittsburgh. He says, I spend a lot of time in West Virginia, in Texas, in Colorado, and I deal with a lot of people of different cultures. He says, I'm an old white guy. In the last week of face-to-face meetings, phone calls, I've got a general idea of what a lot of folks think about the election. He says, my Hispanic friends are telling me that the Democrats were tearing down the family unit. That's how they felt, with things like trans issues and, quote, illegal immigration and the economy. One told me that his family is very religiously based, and so that was his explanation. He says also, when it comes to black voters, the economy, one point that really surprised me was they felt that the identity politics were pissing them off, that they weren't being listened to. One said that they weren't fond of being lectured how they were to think and vote, all because of their ethnicity. But a great majority of all other people I'm talking to, including other old white dudes, says Brent. Love it. At least he lets us know where he stands. He says they're sick of mainstream media and they're relieved that this is all over and they're hopeful that this shit levels out. And he says, and as a PS, he says, our business landscape is already looking better since the election. He says, just an observation, take it or leave it. I'm out. That from Brent, who's writing in from Pittsburgh. So I appreciate that.
Good email. And I like the Star Wars reference from the last time.
It's a trap. How did you find that in 10 seconds? It's a trap.
That's my job.
Amazing. That is your job, and you're very good at it. Also wanted to reference, I saw a note from Cliff in the chat, and I thought that this was a fair comment. We played that Chrystia Freeland clip, and she basically talks about how she won't be intimidated. She says that these maple syrup MAGA conservatives,
Man, she went in.
And then she talks about juvenile insults, and Cliff goes, isn't that kind of a juvenile insult. Tracy said that she's completely sick of the grandstanding that happens in the House of Commons. Appreciate the contributions that you make to our chat. Yesterday, had some strong words, I guess, and you can check out this story here. Mary McEachran, she's 101 years old. She lives in our home city of Edmonton, and as her story goes, she and her husband had initially, her husband Steve had pledged his $40 million estate to Rotary Canada. I think most people are familiar with the nonprofit. It's an international agency that does work all around the world. And Mary says that as time went on through COVID and just before her husband Steve's passing, they'd kind of had a change of heart. He'd kind of changed his mind, and he had decided that, he's a lifelong Rotarian, had already donated $250,000, and they decided as a couple, so says Mary, that instead of pledging the entire $40 million to Rotary, they were going to pledge it to a number of different charities. Rotary's still going to take about $13 million of the 40, but they wanted it to go to a bunch of different charities. Now Rotary is essentially, I guess, ignoring her. That's Mary's side of the story. And it sounds like they could be due for a court battle. It's getting nasty. And of course, the public, I think, sides with the 101-year-old widow as opposed to the nonprofit that comes across as greedy. So I said what I thought in yesterday's episode, and you can find it on our YouTube channel in the highlights. Rotary Fights Widow Over $40 Million Estate is the title, or you can catch our full episode on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So Carmen writes into the show, a regular listener, and Carmen has proven to satisfy our cynicism that they are a Rotarian, provided the necessary proof. Says, Ryan, as you know, I'm a longtime supporter of your show. I rarely miss an episode, and I appreciate that you can accept criticism. I respect that you seek both sides of an issue, but your betrayal of the Rotary Foundation is one where you failed to do so. A couple of thoughts. As a longtime dedicated Rotarian, I can't say enough about how proud I am to be part of this international organization. They do more good in the world than I can even start to express. And I am saddened by your comments on November 12th, which may discourage people from donating to our international foundation. The McEachran family situation is very sad and complicated, but what is more sad is that this happens often with a large fortune and family members fighting. The International Rotary Foundation is a 4-star charity, according to Charity Navigator. To call them greedy is completely offside, as they have no interest other than promoting peace and service in a world of need. Rotary donates to both international and local organizations. Rotary is in my will, and I specified what charities I would like to see supported. It's a simple to do. Without them, polio would be everywhere, girls would not be schooled, water would not be clean, food banks would struggle. I could go on and on. Ryan, you're smart enough to know that this man had a last will and testament, and he specifically laid out where his money should go. His lawyer and or executor were the only people who have the authority to disperse those funds. This is not Rotary making the decision. If his wishes were to personally pick charities to direct those funds, to then an amendment to his will or even witnesses to those wishes could have prevented this upheaval. This man had exceptional financial knowledge. That's true. It's how he made his fortune. And an obvious understanding of wills and estates. Mr. McEachran was a longtime supporter of Rotary, and I suspect he would be unhappy with this negative attention. All of that aside, we both know that there are two sides to everything. Your comments, Ryan, damaged one of the world's most respected charitable organizations based on a small amount of information. And at the end of your rant, you made the comment to think twice the next time Rotary comes calling. OMG, that is so destructive and irresponsible. As an international 4-star charity worth $1.5 billion, this scandal will not harm the foundation, but your comments could harm our local clubs in the region and in your listeners' sphere. Local clubs work so hard to support local charities like the YMCA, Boys and Girls Clubs, food banks, the Bissell Center, the Alberta Firefighter Burn Camp, to name just a few. Please remind people of the good that Rotarians do. Please don't allow this one situation that nobody really understands to detract from all the good that Rotarians, including in Alberta, have spent years pouring their hearts and souls into. That from Carmen. That's a great email, and I don't mind being called to the carpet.
No, fair point.
Yeah, I think that and I said when I tweeted about this yesterday, I said, if I was a Rotarian, I would be mortified by this. And obviously Carmen is enough to write that email. And we don't mind having, as a matter of fact, we invite people sharing their personal perspectives. And if they feel like we're using the platform in a damaging way, we want to hear about it and we want to talk about that. I do think that this is a horrific and very unfortunate situation. I think obviously for the McEachran family, this is very difficult. It's obviously brutal that a 101-year-old is spending her time on this type of thing. But she obviously, Mary, feels very strongly about this as well. And this is a situation where you hope that they can find some resolution. Her position on this is that she's been trying to talk to Rotary, and Rotary is not responding. She told a journalist in an interview that she feels like they're just waiting for her to die. And so this, from a PR standpoint, I think is very damaging.
Not good.
To the charity. I would say to Carmen respectfully that Rotary's position on this and the situation itself is much more damaging than anything that any commentator is going to say about it. But I absolutely understand why Rotarians, many of my friends are Rotarians, I understand why they're mortified by this negative attention and why they do feel like it's going to hurt them on a local level. And that's part of what makes this so brutal.
It does. And I understand, like we were talking about a situation like this at lunch the other day, similar, last will and testaments. It's a sticky situation because you understand that this person who passed away, especially with a spouse, because sometimes they want to do something with their money that they know maybe their spouse wouldn't agree with. And I get that. But this seems like a very loving, close couple, did everything together, that she would know this man. And it's just, it's sad that his change of heart, if that's what happened, I'm guessing that is what happened. This lady doesn't seem, disingenuous. But it happened during COVID, so they couldn't get their will changed. But if anything, I would say to people who are doing last will and testaments, dedicate where you want your money to go. But if you're in a situation like this where you're close with your spouse and you trust them, give them some sort of clause in the will that they can change or have control of that money, after you're dead, if they want to, allocate some funds somewhere else. But again, last will and testament, Ryan, that's written in stone.
It is what it is. That's kind of the whole point of them, right?
Yeah, right.
Vamp Fashion says Rotary did not single-handedly cure polio or clean water. That's revolutionist bunk. I don't think that Carmen makes that claim. Who was it? Someone was giving credit about school funding, said that Rotary was the only group. This is Jim, says Rotary is the only organization to financially sponsor students from grade 6 all the way through to completion of university. And I like this from Ken, who says they should donate all the money to bike lanes and really freak people out. Yeah. There you go, Ken.
I would say, look, if I'm Rotary right now, you're absolutely right, Ryan. This is bad PR. This is, all press is good press. This is not good press at all. And if it does happen, and I don't want to speak lightly of this person, they're still alive, that Mary passes away and this is left, in the air and they end up getting $40 million. If I'm that organization, I take at least $10 million and split it amongst those charities, because we're not talking about $1 million or $250,000. We're talking about $40 million.
Yeah.
If I'm Rotary, take a bit of that money. Show that you are the charity you were talking about in that email, and give a little to these other charities that need the money just as much, are amazing foundations. And you openly said in the email that, are great organizations that you support as well.
Yeah.
Float a little to them.
And Rotary's kind of like the United, they're not parallel, they're not the same, but Rotary is similar to United Way in the sense that they support a ton of, if you donate to what's an example, like the SPCA of Edmonton or something, then exactly where that money is going to. The SPCA is not donating to like the Alberta Cancer Foundation, but groups like Rotary or United Way are then supporting UNICEF, a ton of charities based on what they do. So I 100% agree with Carmen that I do think that this scenario is harming Rotary at local levels for sure. I would also say this, folks' memories are short. And in a year from now, most people won't even remember this story.
That's true.
And I know that in a lot of crisis communications, a lot of people that are professional problem solvers, sometimes that's part of the strategy too, is remembering that things like this do blow over. People will, if I said to you, what was the biggest charity scandal? I guess I think of We Charity and the Prime Minister, but what was the biggest charity scandal in the last 5 years? people have short memories.
Of course.
Like, go through that exercise at home. Like, what was the last charity scandal that you remember? And people would have to think and think and think to remember one, right? That's kind of the way the public memory goes.
But again, like we were talking about this the other day, last will and testaments are written in stone. I'll say it again. But Alberta Girl right here, it's outrageous that this widow has not got control over 50% of the estate. If you trust your spouse and you have a will, Make that a clause. Say that in the end, at least she would have had control of $20 million. You know, if he put in a clause in the will that said, hey, I'm gone. This is where I want my money to go. But my wife has control of 50% if she wants to change her mind.
One of my buddies said to me yesterday after our show, after my comments, he said the stipulation in the will was that of the $40 million estate, that the estate was to go to Rotary minus Mary's living expenses. My buddy says, well, maybe one of her living expenses should be a new Picasso.
I was just going to say.
That's one way to look at it, I guess. Can you tee up Kevin Van Tighem for me?
Yeah.
Because we got a really great email, and on the 7th of November, we talked to the former superintendent of Banff National Park. He's got a book out. It's not a new book, but he launched it during COVID, so he's kind of doing some of his book touring and talking about it now that they can gather back in person. It's called Wild Roses Are Worth It, Reimagining the Alberta Advantage. This guy is super passionate about Alberta, and he talked to us in particular, before we get to a wonderful email from Marie, Kevin was talking to us about land use planning, about coal mining in the eastern slopes, and about the future of water in Alberta.
We have a regional plan for the southern Alberta, South Saskatchewan regional plan, which is being amended this year. And the government is being very, very low-key on that because they left themselves an escape hatch when they closed down coal mining. They said coal mining is closed down unless it's approved in a regional plan. So am I paranoid and suspicious? Yeah, and legitimately so. I'm suspecting that we're going to see them open up the Oldman headwaters to coal again, and they're going to do it through the South Saskatchewan regional plan. That they've got a goofy little online consultation about that they will say was their effort to do public consultation. So we're not out of the woods. There is a current coal mine proposal actually in the regulatory process, even though coal mining is being shut down. And there's a process in place that is probably going to open up the eastern slopes again, in spite of the fact that these people work for us and that coal belongs to us. And we should be the ones that make the decision about how it's managed. And we've told them what the decision is, and they're ignoring it.
That was Kevin Van Tighem on the 7th of November. I encourage you to the guy is smart as hell and passionate about protecting our natural resources and of course for future generations. Marie was watching. She emails to talk@ryanjesperson.com, says, I just want to thank you for that interview. I consider Kevin a personal friend, and I helped him with his campaign during his run in Livingston-Macleod to become an NDP MLA. He's what I would classify as a true Albertan. He loves the province and all the good things about it. He stands by his word. He truly cares about all the people living here. He's not really a political person, but he saw injustices happening, and he stood up to try to right the wrongs that keep happening by governments that we've had and the government we currently have. And he became a target for mean-spirited constituents and maybe even just bots. He talked to us, by the way, about being attacked. They called him basically an enemy of the state for describing Alberta as a petro state. He comments on it and addresses that in the interview. I appreciated him taking that question. Marie says, I'm not the one to actually differentiate between the two that I saw, but I saw the strain that it took on this man, and he just wanted to do right in simple terms, and we could all actually take a lesson from him. Kevin currently helps with the committee that I'm part of. He helps us when his busy life allows for it. We're like-minded folks that have concerns around many issues happening. We started as a kitchen table talk group, just chatting over coffee and snacks. We saw divisiveness between neighbors, friends, and families, and we wanted to try to do something to change that. Marie says, we call ourselves the Chinook Watershed Crew, and our mission statement is we're nonpartisan. We're an inclusive community group that promotes science-based information to stimulate informed and respectful discussion on issues of the day. I love that. She says, we really hope to create a place where people can have that the watershed moment. Says, trust me, it's a far greater task than it sounds like. We've only been doing it for about a year. We hosted an event last April in Claresholm. Kevin was a moderator of a guest panel, several well-educated folks around water issues and drought and our dwindling supply of clean water in the southern part of the province. To our surprise, we had approximately 350 people to the event from all walks of life. They too obviously concerned about the water issue. We successfully hosted our second event in Nanton, Alberta. Love Nanton. Had a highly educated panel of speakers. Approximately 250 people attended that one. It was all about water and the devastating effects that coal mining will have on it. And again, people from all walks of life turning out to that event. She says, I'd like to also add this committee runs entirely on donations. Any expenses we have are covered by donations or out of our own pockets. All of our speakers donated their time, including Corblund, what a beauty, because they're concerned for our water and what's coming our way if we don't stop this mining in its tracks. She says, my point is people can come together on common ground and come to agreement if we can keep politics out of things. Coal mining and water are on our agenda at further events, and I would encourage your dedicated viewers and listeners, if they'd like to help us, they can contact us or phone, visit, write their elected representatives and say exactly that. And she says, I'm talking about at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels. You can't just hope others will do the work for you. Remind the government who they work for, says Marie. She says, I think we all need to act a little bit more like Kevin and care for the good things about this province and work hard to protect it. She says, keep bringing on great guests and I'll keep watching. She says, I won't even be deterred by the bullies in your live chat. She says, I know I'm following the path of my ancestors who homesteaded here in 1902. She signs off, say hi to Johnny. That from
hi there.
Marie. I thought that was a great email. You can send us your thoughts anytime to talk@ryanjesperson.com. I want to talk to you very quickly about Friesen Brothers. You know that on the 17th of November, there's a big birthday party happening at Friesen Brothers as Charlie, their sourdough starter, turns 9 years old, and they've got a whole bunch of stuff coming up. You can check it out on their website, friesen.com/Charlie. To celebrate on the 17th of November, they'll be gifting free Friesen Brothers cinnamon spread when customers purchase a full sourdough loaf. Johnny, you know that Friesen Brothers stores in Stony Plain, Fort Saskatchewan, Rabbit Hill, and Glenora in Edmonton are going to be hosting a special Charlie's birthday dinner. Roasted Alberta beef, sourdough jalapeno popper dumplings, sourdough popcorn chicken, sourdough crusted green beans. What? Sourdough gravy? Even more amazing dishes made with sourdough. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet for just $20 per person on the 17th of November at the stores we mentioned. That's friesen.com/Charlie. And we want to give a shout-out to Complete Care Restoration, literally our only partner that hopes that you never have to call them. But if disaster strikes, if there's a flood, a sewer backup, those are the worst. If you find black mold in your place, don't let it sit there. It's not going to resolve itself. As a matter of fact, it could be getting worse and worse and worse. They have a team of trained professionals ready to respond 24/7. And if it's an insurance claim, they'll work directly with your insurer so you don't have to deal with all the forms, all that BS that comes with it. We've worked with Complete Care Restoration. We give them 2 thumbs up. You can find them online at completecarerestoration.ca. Lauren says, focusing on politics as an average person is a bad idea. You have very little influence except for every 4 years. Yeah, I don't know if I agree. I do think that we need to hold politicians accountable. I do wish that more civilians, so to speak, that are driven like Marie is by a clear sense of community spirit, by a desire to protect our communities for future generations. I wish more of those folks, fewer of the self-serving folks would get involved in politics. But I also understand why a lot of people want nothing to do with politics, because it's become such a nasty arena.
Yeah.
You don't blame the average person for saying, I think I'm good. I'm good on that.
That's why on the weekends I just kind of flush it all away. No, I don't. I watch CNN.
Well, you know what?
No,
No, you deserve credit, man, because you never worked. You know, your media career, your radio career, your public facing career for many years had absolutely nothing to do with politics.
No.
And then you stepped in and took this job, and you jumped right into the deep end.
I think that was the great thing about like Top 40 Radio was that, you know, when all this stuff is going on, your job is to like divert people's attention for 30 seconds, a minute, 5 minutes, whatever you can to make them feel better. So we would just divert to pop culture and stuff like that and positive reflections, so to speak, Ryan. But we try to do that on this show too. We know that sometimes we see you guys like, you know, today over 400 people coming through on the chat who, Yeah, we know it's a lot to take on sometimes, so we try to take a break. I would wager and tell everyone right now that you will do better if you take a break. Take a break from things. I know things are so heated right now. You go on social media, you go on X, you go wherever, and the news feed ever since the election and the UCP AGM, like it's just you're inundated with this stuff all day, and there's no battle to be won because I know, like that commenter just said, it can feel like you're powerless sometimes until a big election comes around and you get your one little vote. But it's not just one little vote, and you should keep up on things. And I used to be someone, I remember our first shows here, I'd be like, I don't know anything about politics. Now I'm forced to, right? So who is it who said it best? If you're not involved in politics, like it'll bite you in the ass because something will come up that relates to you, and you're going to be left out if you don't have a say on it, right?
Yeah, in the chat, 80s Fanify says, yeah, it must be nice if politics doesn't affect you. I mean, in real terms, politics does affect everybody, whether it's like the property taxes that you're paying or whether it's legislation in schools or whatever it is.
You don't think it does till it does.
You don't think it does till it does, and then it's too late. And you'll hear from a lot of people, like, I love like how Marie's talking about, they're getting together people from different walks of life around the kitchen table, and then all of a sudden these private citizens are hosting events that, grassroots funded by donations and volunteers, and all of a sudden you're drawing 350 people, and you get the sense that that's just the beginning. That's incredible. I mean, that's the beauty of sort of politics in real life and in practice, led by the grassroots, led by people. And I love that she said there, remind the politicians who they work for. They do work for you. We'll continue to do that on a day-to-day basis. As we say goodbye on this episode, I want to let you know that coming up on the next episode of Real Talk, it'll be a Real Talk roundtable, and we're going to be focusing specifically on our hometown, Alberta's capital city of Edmonton, in particular downtown revitalization that in some senses appears to be on the right track and in other senses, quite frankly, appears to be a complete disaster. What's the fix? Now, I guarantee you'll hear perspectives that you could apply to cities across Canada and around the world, and we hope you'll join us. Plus, as mentioned, the flamethrower. If you've got a hot take you got to get off your chest, send us an email right now to talk@ryanjesperson.com.
Real Talk is hosted